My neighbor laughed at my old pickup truck until he saw it pulling his luxury SUV out of the mud. I've lived in this small suburban neighborhood just outside of Portland, Maine for nearly 15 years now. My house isn't fancy. A modest two-bedroom with faded blue siding that I've been meaning to replace for the past 3 summers. But it's mine, all paid off 5 years ago, and that means something to me. In the driveway sits my pride and joy, though you'd never know it by looking at it, a 1993 Ford F-150. Forest green with patches of rust along the wheel wells and a dent in the passenger door from when my son Ryan was learning to ride his bike. That truck has seen me through everything. 3 job changes, a divorce, helping Ryan move to college, and countless weekend projects. Most folks around here know me by my truck. "There goes Tom," they'd say with a wave as I rumble by. The engine's loud, but it purrs like a kitten when properly tuned, which I make sure it always is. Everything was pretty routine until the Michelsons moved in next door last September. The old Victorian had been vacant for nearly 8 months after Mrs. Calloway passed away. The real estate sign came down, and within days, a moving truck appeared, followed by a gleaming black Cadillac Escalade that looked like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. Richard Michelson was about my age, maybe mid-50s, but everything about him screamed, "I've made it." From his crisp button-downs to his designer sunglasses. He worked in finance, something about investment portfolios that he explained once while I was grabbing my mail, though I only half listened. His wife Elaine was pleasant enough, always offering a polite wave when we crossed paths. "Beautiful neighborhood you've got here," Richard said the first time we spoke, extending his hand with a firm grip. "We were looking for somewhere quieter after all those years in Boston." "It's peaceful," I agreed, noticing how his eyes drifted to my truck and lingered there a beat too long. I saw that look before, a mixture of confusion and barely concealed judgment. I'd gotten used to it over the years, especially from folks who measured success by the shininess of their possessions. What Richard didn't understand, what most people like him didn't get, is that my truck wasn't just transportation. It was freedom. It was reliability. The first few weeks were fine. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the unseasonably warm fall, and went about our lives. Then came the Saturday morning when I was under the hood, changing the oil like I did every 3 months. The truck was running rough, and I suspected it needed a new air filter too. I heard the purr of the Escalade's engine as Richard pulled into his driveway. He stepped out, dressed in golf attire, clubs visible in the back. "Morning, Tom," he called, walking over. "Car trouble?" "Nah, just regular maintenance," I replied, wiping my hands on an old rag. He glanced at the truck, then back at me. "You know, the new F-150s have amazing features these days. Backup cameras, heated seats, the works. Dealership downtown is having a sale this weekend." I straightened up. "This old girl's got a few 100,000 miles left in her." Richard chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "Well, to each their own. Just seems like a lot of work for something that's, well, past its prime." Before I could respond, he was walking away, twirling his key fob around his finger. "Have a good one," he called over his shoulder. I stood there, hands greasy, feeling something between annoyance and amusement. If Richard thought a person's worth was tied to the newness of their vehicle, we were definitely operating on different wavelengths. Little did I know then how dramatically our perspectives would collide in the coming weeks. November in Maine brings unpredictable weather. One day it's bright and crisp with that perfect fall bite in the air, and the next, you're watching storm clouds roll in with alarming speed. The weatherman had been warning about this particular system for days. A nor'easter threatening to drop several inches of rain, with wind gusts up to 50 miles per hour. I'd spent the previous weekend preparing, clearing gutters, trimming back the old maple that hung over my roof, and stocking up on essentials. Living in New England this long teaches you to respect Mother Nature's temper tantrums. My generator was fueled up, batteries were charged, and I had enough canned food to last a week if needed. The day before the storm, I noticed Richard struggling with some fallen branches in his yard. His pristine loafers were getting muddy as he attempted to drag a particularly large limb toward the curb. "Need a hand?" I offered, walking over. He looked up, slightly embarrassed. "Just trying to get ahead of this storm they're predicting." These trees are a bit more maintenance than we expected. I helped him clear the larger debris, and as we worked, I casually asked, "You got preparations in place? These nor'easters can knock power out for days sometimes." Richard straightened his jacket. "We've got candles and flashlights. The house has that fancy backup battery system for essential circuits. We'll be fine." I nodded, not wanting to push it. "Well, if you need anything, I'm right next door." Truck's always gassed up. He glanced at my F-150 and smiled politely. "Thanks, but I think we're covered. The Escalade has four-wheel drive, top of the line. It can handle anything." There it was again, that tone that suggested his new, expensive SUV was inherently superior to my weathered pickup. I bit my tongue and just nodded. "Four-wheel drive is good," I acknowledged. "But it's about weight distribution and ground clearance too. And knowing the terrain." Richard's phone rang, and he excused himself, clearly relieved to end our conversation about vehicle capabilities. I returned home, shaking my head slightly. Some lessons you just have to learn firsthand. The storm hit Tuesday night, right on schedule. I was awakened around 2 a.m. by the howling wind and the persistent drumming of rain against my windows. A flash of lightning illuminated my bedroom, followed almost instantly by a crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very foundation of the house. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. I wasn't worried. My generator kicked in automatically, powering the essentials, refrigerator, furnace, a few lights. I got up anyway, checked the windows, and peered out at the deluge. Water was already pooling at the low point of our street, where the drainage had always been problematic. The town had promised to fix it for years, but somehow it never made the budget. Through the rain-streaked window, I could see the Michelson's house was dark. Their fancy battery system must not have engaged, or perhaps it wasn't designed for a prolonged outage. I considered walking over to check on them, but decided it could wait until morning. If they needed help, they knew where to find me. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the damage was evident. My yard had weathered it well, a few small branches down, nothing serious. The street, however, was another matter. The pooling water had turned the low section into a muddy mess, nearly a foot deep in places. And there, right in the middle of it, was Richard's gleaming Escalade, listing slightly to one side, its expensive tires buried in mud. I pulled on my rain gear and boots and headed outside to assess the situation. As I approached, I could see Richard in the driver's seat, the engine revving as he attempted to rock the vehicle free. All he was accomplishing was digging it in deeper, mud spraying from beneath the tires in dirty arcs. Our eyes met through his windshield, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something I recognized all too well, wounded pride mixed with the dawning realization that he might need help from the very person whose vehicle choices he'd quietly mocked. The stage was set for what would become the talk of the neighborhood for months to come. The rain had eased to a misty drizzle by the time I made my way to Richard's stranded Escalade. He'd rolled down his window, the pristine interior of his luxury SUV, a stark contrast to the muddy chaos outside. His hands were gripping the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white with frustration. "Morning," I called out, assessing the situation. The Escalade's rear end had slid partway into the drainage ditch, and the more he tried to power out, the deeper the tires had sunk into the softened earth. Even with four-wheel drive, the vehicle's weight was working against it, pushing it further into the muck with each attempt. "I don't understand," Richard said, gesturing angrily. "This thing has all-terrain capability. Cost me almost 90 grand, and it can't handle a little mud." I bit back a smile. All-terrain capability is marketing talk. What you're dealing with here is physics, weight distribution, and the wrong tires for these conditions. He sighed heavily, finally cutting the engine. "I need to get to a client meeting in Portland by noon. Called a tow truck, but they're swamped with emergencies. Said it might be 5 hours. I nodded, surveying the scene again. "You won't make your meeting waiting for a tow." Richard finally stepped out of the vehicle, designer shoes immediately sinking ankle-deep into the mud. He swore under his breath. "I could give you a ride into town," I offered. He looked at me, then at my truck sitting high and dry in my driveway, and I saw the internal struggle play across his face. Pride wrestling with practicality. Or, I continued, I could pull you out. With that. The disbelief in his voice was evident as he gestured toward my F-150. That old truck has a winch and tow chains that have pulled out vehicles twice its size, I replied evenly. Farm equipment, too. Back when I helped my brother-in-law during harvest seasons. Richard looked dubious but nodded reluctantly. If you think it will work. I returned to my garage, gathering what I'd need: heavy-duty chains, gloves, and a couple of wooden planks to give the Escalade's tires something to grip once we got it moving. When I pulled my truck around, positioning it at the optimal angle for the extraction, I couldn't help but notice several neighbors had emerged onto their porches, coffee mugs in hand, to watch the proceedings. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. My mud-splattered, rust-speckled Ford facing off against Richard's sleek, modern Cadillac that suddenly looked very out of place, half swallowed by Maine mud. I attached the chains with practiced efficiency, explaining each step to Richard, who watched with a mixture of curiosity and lingering skepticism. You're going to want to steer gradually towards solid ground once you feel it moving, I instructed. Don't gun it, slow and steady pressure on the gas. He nodded, climbing back into the driver's seat with as much dignity as the situation allowed. The F-150's engine growled to life, the sound familiar and reassuring. I gave it some gas, taking up the slack in the chain before beginning the careful process of extraction. The truck's tires gripped the road perfectly, finding purchase where the Escalade couldn't. There was resistance at first, the mud reluctant to release its expensive prey. I increased the power gradually, feeling rather than seeing the moment when the Escalade began to move. Slowly, steadily, my old truck pulled the luxury SUV from its muddy prison, the chains creaking under the strain but holding firm. When the Cadillac's tires finally reached the wooden planks I'd positioned, Richard was able to apply gentle power, helping the process along. 3 minutes later, the Escalade was back on solid pavement, mud-caked but undamaged. I disconnected the chains and coiled them neatly, tucking them back into my truck bed. Richard stepped out, looking at his dirty vehicle, then at my truck, and finally at me. The neighborhood audience was still watching, a few offering approving nods in my direction. I don't know what to say, Richard admitted, the forced confidence gone from his voice. Except thank you, I shrugged. That's what neighbors do. He extended his hand, and this time when we shook, there was something different in his eyes, a newfound respect that had nothing to do with property values or status symbols. I'd better go get cleaned up if I'm going to make that meeting, he said. Would you mind if I took you up on that ride offer? I smiled. Give me 10 minutes to grab a coffee for the road. As we walked back toward our respective houses, I heard him say quietly, almost to himself, guess there's something to be said for old reliable things after all. I didn't respond, but as I glanced back at my faithful truck, I couldn't help but think that some lessons are best learned through experience, and sometimes the most valuable things aren't the ones with the highest price tags. The ride into Portland that morning was the beginning of an unexpected friendship. Richard sat in my passenger seat, initially tense and clearly unused to the rumble of the old engine and the worn upholstery beneath him. But as the miles passed, I could see him gradually relaxing. Been meaning to ask, he said, gesturing at the dashboard where I'd mounted a small photograph. Family? I nodded. My son Ryan. That was taken at his college graduation 3 years ago. What's he doing now? Environmental engineering, working on sustainable water systems in rural communities. I couldn't keep the pride from my voice. Started his own firm last year. Richard seemed surprised. That's impressive. Must have been expensive, that kind of education. I shrugged. It was. Worth every penny, though. There was a moment of silence, and I could almost hear the gears turning in Richard's head, reconciling the man with the modest home and aging truck with the father who had put his son through an expensive education. The truck, he finally said. It's not just about not being able to afford a new one, is it? I chuckled. No, could have bought a new one several times over. But this one's paid for, runs well with basic maintenance, and every mile I get out of it instead of taking on a new car payment is money I can put elsewhere. Like your son's education, or my retirement fund, or helping out at the community center downtown. Living below my means gives me options. We pulled up to his office building, a gleaming glass structure in Portland's business district. Before getting out, Richard turned to me. "I think I misjudged you, Tom. And that truck." "Most people do," I replied with a smile. "It's human nature to make assumptions based on appearances." The following Saturday, I was surprised to see Richard in his driveway, not with detailing equipment for his Escalade as I might have expected, but with a toolbox beside him as he peered under the hood of his wife's sedan. I wandered over, curious. "Car trouble?" He looked up, a sheepish expression on his face. "Oil change. Dealer wanted $90. Figured it was time I learned to do some basic maintenance myself." I raised an eyebrow, unable to hide my surprise. "Don't look so shocked," he said with a laugh. "You've got me thinking about where my money goes. Did you know the maintenance package I bought for the Escalade costs more annually than you probably spend on your truck in 3 years?" "I believe it," I replied, moving closer to see what he was doing. "Need some help?" Richard stepped aside gratefully. "Please. I watched a YouTube video, but I'm not sure I've got the right filter." For the next hour, I showed him the basics, how to properly drain the oil, replace the filter, check other fluid levels. His designer clothes were soon stained with grease, but he didn't seem to mind. "You know," he said as we finished up, "in Boston, status was everything. The right car, the right address, the right schools. Moving here was Elaine's idea. She wanted something quieter. But I think we both needed a different perspective." I nodded, understanding. "It's not about the truck, Richard. Never was. It's about values. Knowing what matters." Over the following months, our neighborhood dynamic shifted. Richard still drove his Escalade, but he also started showing interest in more practical matters, joining the neighborhood association, helping organize the spring cleanup of the local park. He even asked me to teach him some basic home repair skills when his bathroom faucet started leaking. The real surprise came in April when I spotted him pulling into his driveway in a used Ford Ranger, nothing fancy, just a solid little pickup with a practical bed for weekend projects. "The Escalade's still for client meetings," he explained when I commented on it. "But for everything else, turns out having a truck is pretty useful. Even Elaine admits it makes the hardware store runs easier." That summer, when a minor flooding issue threatened the lower part of our street again, it was Richard who organized the neighborhood response, showing up in his Ranger loaded with sandbags and equipment. Standing beside me as we directed the volunteer effort, he nudged my shoulder. "You know what I've learned since moving here, Tom?" "What's that?" "It's not what you drive that defines you. It's where you're willing to go and who you're willing to help along the way." I looked at my old F-150 parked nearby, still faithful after all these years, and then at the community we'd built, stronger now because someone had looked beyond appearances to see real value. "Couldn't have said it better myself," I replied, as we turned back to the work at hand. Neighbors helping neighbors, regardless of what sat in their driveways.